All right, Mr. Ahmed here working on lesson 0-2, which involves simplifying radicals. All right, so before we actually get into the simplifying of a radical, we're going to talk about numbers being squared and taking the square root of those numbers, and then also what a perfect square is. So in this chart, this could be very handy as you work throughout your assignment in order to look for perfect square factors and memorizing what the perfect squares are, and just a good understanding of where they come from. So when I think of our integers, the first one is 1. When we talk about 1 being squared, 1 times itself is 1. And the square root, this symbol here, the square root, that means what number times itself is that number. So what number times itself is 1? That is 1, therefore 1 is a perfect square. Okay, when I take the square root of 1, I get a integer. The next number is 2. 2 squared is 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. And the square root of 4. What number times itself is 4? Well, 2 times itself is 4, so 4 is also a perfect square. Then I think of 3. 3 squared is 9. Square root of 9 is 3, so 3 is also 9 is also a perfect square, because when I take the square root of 9, I get 3. And I'm just going to work through this chart with our integers, and as we go up, we'll see which numbers are perfect squares, and those are found by squaring a number. So 4 squared is equal to 16. The square root of 16, what number times itself is 16? Well, that'd have to be 4. So 16 is also a perfect square. 5 squared, 5 times 5 is 25. If I take the square root of 25, we should see a pattern here. One number times itself is 25. That has to be 5. So 25 is a perfect square. And as I work my way through this process, throughout this whole chart, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit now. 6 squared is 36. Square root of 36 is 6. So 36 is also a perfect square. Our next perfect square. Well, if I take 7 squared, that would have to be 49. 49 is a perfect square because the square root of 49 is equal to 7. And so on and so forth throughout the rest of our numbers. So I'm going to just list the perfect squares from 8 on down to 15. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared is 81. 10 squared is 100. 11 squared is 121. 12 squared is 144. 13 squared is 169. 14 squared, I actually don't remember that off the top of my head, so I'm going to type it in. That's 196. And 15 squared is 225. Okay? So, the key here out of this chart are all the numbers on our right, our perfect squares. We really want to try and memorize these. Okay, 1's a perfect square, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, etc. And the way I can memorize those is by just taking our integers and squaring them as we did throughout this entire chart. Okay, so this chart's pretty helpful. I will fill in the whole thing and make sure that it's posted, but I didn't want to do every single one on the video to keep it a little bit shorter. Okay, so simplifying radicals. When we have a perfect square, they're pretty easy. A perfect square is a number whose square root is an integer. So again, we already have all these listed just like we did on the chart. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, etc. And if I just need to find the square root of a perfect square, I just list that number. And on our calculators, to take the square root, typically the square root is going to be above the squared button. So on my calculator here, I see this x squared with the square root above it in green. I have to press the second key first to get that to pop up so I can type the square root. Okay, so that's how we'd use our calculators for it. You'll probably have to press the second key. So, the square root of 16. What number times itself is 16? Well, 4. 4 times 4 is 16, so the square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 100. What number times itself is 100? 10 is. And 256. Well, we did do the 256, or did we not do the 256? I don't remember seeing it, but let's check. I'm going to use my calculator for this one, see if it's a perfect square. So second, square root 256. Oh, 16. So 16 times 16 is 256. We didn't quite go that high on our last chart. That's why we didn't see that one. Typically, if you can have these memorized through 144, 169, that's probably good. Otherwise, from there, you can use a calculator as well. So the perfect squares are pretty straightforward. The more difficult problems are our non-perfect squares, okay? So if I have to simplify a non-perfect square, I'm going to split the radical into two radicals. And the way I split it is by finding factors, numbers times itself that are equal to that number, okay? And the one that I want to pull out is the largest perfect square that divides into that number. We can use our calculator to check, okay? We're going to place the perfect square in the first radical and the other number in the second, and we'll take the square root of the perfect square to simplify it. And we are not simplified till we pull out every perfect square factor. If you pull out the biggest one first, that's going to be the easiest. So our first one says the square root of 8. So if I take the square root of 8, I'm just going to show you kind of what we get here. We get an irrational number, which is a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal. And it's 2.828. It just keeps on going. So that's not a perfect square. So we want to simplify it to exact form. So I have to think which perfect square factor goes into 8. Now our perfect square factors, those are these perfect squares we listed on our first chart. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. You might want to write those down on the top of your worksheet or have them handy to look at. So what perfect square factor goes into 8? Well, 4 does. 4 is a perfect square. So 4 times 2 is 8. I'm going to rewrite it as the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Then I can take the square root of 4, which is 2 times the square root of 2. It is simplified. Now for 50. Perfect square that goes into 50. Let's look at our perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16. Oh, 25. 25 times 2 is 50. So I'm going to rewrite it as the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. The square root of 25 is 5. I leave the square root of 2. We have simplified our problem. The next one, 32. Which perfect square factor goes into 32? Now the hardest part is figuring out which perfect square goes in. So if you don't know, you want to start with the bigger ones. We obviously have to start with a number less than 32. And the first one's 25. So if I take 32 divided by 25, that doesn't go in evenly. Not our correct answer. 32 divided by 25 is 1.28. So I'm going to try the next one. 32 divided by 16, using my calculator. 16 times 2 is 32. It went in perfectly. So I can rewrite square root of 16 times square root of 2. 16 was the bigger one. Keep in mind 4 would have worked, but we want the largest one. Square root of 16 is 4 times square root of 2. Simplify. Next one, 54. So again, we have to figure out which number goes into 54 that's a perfect square. So we'd practice dividing. If you know it, great. But if you don't know it, you'd use your calculator to check. So I'm going to take 54 divided by 25. Doesn't work. 54 divided 16. Nope. 54 divided 9. Yep, 9 times 6. So I'll rewrite square root 9 times square root 6. Square root of 9 is 3 times the square root of 6. It is simplified, and we are done with that one. Now 500. Oh, 100 goes in. 100 times 5. So I'll rewrite square root 100 times square root 5. The perfect square is 100. I put it first. Square root of 100 is 10 times the square root of 5. Now a common error here. After you take the square root, do not put the square root sign back on top of it. The square root is gone after I take the square root. I don't have to do it twice. Okay, 338. I don't know that one. All right, that's not one that floats in the back of my mind of what goes into 338. So I'm going to use my calculator to check. So 338, numbers smaller than 338. Let's try 144. Nope, 338 divided by the next one smaller is 121. Nope, 338 divided by 100. Nope. 81. Nope. 64. Nope. After 64 is 49. Nope. 36. Nope. 25 is 8. Nope. 16 smaller. Nope. 9? Nope. 4? No. So I didn't find one that went into 338. Which one did I miss? I didn't go up big enough. I started at 144, so I should have tried 169. Let's try 338 divided by 169. There it is. 169 times 2 is 338, so we needed to use 169. So the square root of 169 times the square root of 2. Square root of 169 is 13. Square root of 2. Found our solution. So as you can see, for number 6, I took some time for that one. Tried some numbers, hit a snag. I mean, there are some that do not work, but if you don't know them, you just have to keep on trying till you find the one that goes in. For the most part, your assignment will have some perfect square factors for you to pull out. All right, next page, 55. So perfect squares that go into 55. You could try them all. All right, you could try 25. You could try them every single one. And for this problem, it turns out that there is not a perfect square factor. So, I mean, I can't try numbers bigger than 55. So the first one smaller is 49. So 55 divided 49, didn't work. 36, doesn't work. I work my way through all of those and I get decimals. There isn't one. So I just leave it the way it sits. It's the square root of 55. Okay? So, from here, I am going to leave you guys to try the next 5 questions on your own. All right? I will post the completed notes online, but the video is right at about 12 minutes. So we're going to call it a day. These are also 5 questions that we might go over in class as well. So that's all we have for today. Have a good one, and we'll catch you later.